Welcome back, everyone. And in the last video, I described the 3rd century crisis. So, second video, I talked about the ancient world, ancient society, the ancient Mediterranean that's dominated by the Roman Empire. And then in the next video, I explained that in the period from 150 to 250, this world, this society, the ancient world, enters a period of crisis. A period of crisis that's an economic crisis, a political crisis, a demographic crisis. And this crisis is resolved by the Emperor Diocletian. Diocletian, who rises to become emperor in 284. He's the son of a steward who previously had been a slave, and he's from the middle of the empire. He's from the parts of the empire where the part where most people speak Latin and the most people speak Greek come together. Now, he rises to become emperor in the normal way. He becomes emperor by killing the previous emperor in a military coup backed by the army. This has been going on for about 100 years now. Basically, the Roman emperors have just become military chieftains who command the loyalty of the army until someone else takes control or someone else rises to that position of power. However, once he becomes the emperor, Diocletian is going to be the instrument that resolves the 3rd century crisis. And he does this, first of all, by revamping the role of the emperor. Firstly, he reduces the power of the Senate. And so the Senate, which had not held much power for the last 100 years anyway, Diocletian says, you no longer manage the great empire, you are simply the city council of Rome. So he reduces the power of the Senate and he increases the authority of the emperor. The emperor is now no longer simply the first citizen who is respected for his virtue and who can unite the armies and the Senate together. Instead, the emperor becomes a sacred person. The emperor is a semi-divine being. Sacrifices are offered to him. The emperor wears a purple robe. He wears a crown, a diadem, instead of a military cloak and a laurel wreath. And he becomes much more removed from the rest of society. And this image gives you a little bit of a sense of these changes that now approaching the emperor, coming close to the emperor, was much more difficult. The emperor was removed from the rest of society. He was presented as this godlike figure, and the Diocletian wasn't crazy. He didn't think that he was a god. But what he understood was that by presenting the emperor in this way, it made it more difficult to kill the emperor. One, because it was difficult to get close to him, and two, because the idea of killing the emperor isn't just we need to replace this general with another one. The idea of killing the emperor becomes, are we willing to take on the responsibility of killing a god? And so Diocletian's revamping of the role of the emperor is a part of a solution to this political crisis in which you have this constant turnover of emperors and a lack of political stability in the Roman Empire. So now we start to have sacrifices being offered to the emperor. And Diocletian didn't think he was a god. Lots of other Romans didn't think he was a god. So what did the sacrifices achieve? The sacrifices showed the importance of stability. And so this is what it's always important to recognize about politics and political narratives and political rhetoric, and this extends to the current day. It's not just about what the rhetoric says or what the ceremony says. It's about what the rhetoric and the ceremonies say and also mean. The act of offering sacrifice for a lot of Romans isn't about saying that Diocletian is a god necessarily. It's about saying stability is really important. Offering a sacrifice to the emperor emphasizes that it's a really big deal to remove the emperor. And it's a really bad thing to assassinate an emperor. And this is a way that we're going to bring stability and peace out of the chaos of the 3rd century crisis. That is what the act of the ceremony of offering a sacrifice to the emperor meant to most Romans at this time. except for a small but important minority, and that is the growing Christian religion in the Roman Empire. For the Christians, this isn't what this ceremony means at all. This isn't saying that stability is important, it's important not to kill the emperor. This ceremony is saying there is another God besides the one God alone who you are supposed to worship, and you are worshiping this other God who's not really a God, who's just a human being. And so many Christians refuse to do this, or at least a significant number of Christians refuse to participate in these sacrifices. And so Diocletian carries out the first wholesale persecution of Christianity in the Roman Empire. Christians have been persecuted in the Roman Empire before. In a number of instances, they had been seen as dangerous because of their exclusive religion, and they've been seen as potential troublemakers. But no one had ever said, let's force all the Christians in the empire either to renounce their religion or face death and torture. And that is what Diocletian did. Again, in order, as he saw it, to try and end the political crisis of the 3rd century and to re-establish political stability in Rome. Now, for Christians, this is an all-out attack on their religion. Some of them are willing to become martyrs. Some of them are willing to die. Some of them are willing to be killed by wild beasts for the entertainment of the Romans rather than to give up their religion. And so this is seen as a way of imitating Christ. It's seen as a way of giving up your life rather than sinning. This is seen as becomes seen as the highest way you can live out the life of a Christian. To give up everything, be willing to give up everything rather than your religious beliefs. And it's true that this example inspires other Romans who had previously been suspicious of Christianity in a world that looks increasingly uncertain, or where the future looks increasingly uncertain, to say, here's a creed that at least a significant number of people consider it worth dying in order to stay loyal to. And it actually increases the number of Romans who are interested in Christianity, who are sympathetic to Christianity, and who even become Christians. So, remember that this week we're looking at the economic foundations of the Middle Ages, but we're also looking at the religious foundations. And so we have this strand of the history of Christianity that's woven really deep into the transition from the ancient world, where Christianity is a very small religion, to the age of late antiquity and the Middle Ages, where Christianity is increasingly important. So Diocletian is restoring political stability to the empire, but there's also this push and pull and difficult dynamic between Christians and the Roman Empire. So you have to keep both these narratives alive in your head at the same time. This is one of the challenges of history. The story of Diocletian isn't just about persecuting the Christians, it isn't just about political reform. The two narratives are running alongside and are bumping into one another. As well as changing the authority of the empire as a way to resolve the political crisis of the 3rd century, Diocletian is also going to change the political structure of the empire. He realizes that without the Senate having a role in the government of the empire is too big to be governed by one man. And so he establishes a new system of government. And that is the system of the tetrarchy, or the rule of 4. So we're no longer going to have an emperor who's the first citizen or the leading senator and who unites the army and the Senate. Instead, we're going to have 4 emperors. We're going to have 2 senior emperors, one ruling over the eastern half of the empire and one ruling over the western half of the empire, and they are going to be called, each one of them is going to be called Augustus or Augusti, and then each one of them is going to have a subordinate, one in the east and one in the west, and these will be called Caesars. Diocletian also moves the capital of the Roman Empire to Nicomedea. Wait, what? How can you have the Roman Empire without the capital being in Rome? What's going on here? In fact, the fact that Diocletian changes the location of the capital of the Roman Empire reflects trends that have been going on for some time now. Increasingly, the eastern half of the empire, the eastern provinces of the empire, are wealthier, are more economically secure, have bigger armies, bigger populations, and are more stable. And increasingly, Rome is impoverished, depopulated, corrupt, and difficult to defend. And so Diocletian recognizes the necessity, born of the 3rd century crisis, of relocating the capital of the empire to the east and rebuilding the empire around the eastern provinces, making the more secure and stable eastern provinces the new foundations and core of the empire. Lastly, Diocletian is going to reform the economy of the Roman Empire. So we've seen his political reforms in terms of how the empire is governed, transition to a tetrarchy, and how the emperor is understood, now understood as this sort of godlike figure, much more like a monarch, much more remote. Diocletian's also going to try and reform the economy of the empire. The challenge is that you've had emperor after emperor printing new money, trying to buy the loyalty of the army, and so money is devalued and worthless. So what does Diocletian try and do first? He tries to issue new money. He says, don't worry about all that old money. That old money was bad. I'm going to give you new money. I'm going to produce some new coins. These coins are the real deal. No one really believes this. No one really trusts that the emperors have been printing and producing and minting more money for almost a century now. And each new set of money has had less precious metal and has been worth less than the previous generation. So people are just hoarding the old money that has all the precious metal. So this initial effort at an economic reform doesn't work. Diocletian tries another tactic. I'm going to force you to accept the value of money that I'm establishing by forcing you to sell products for a certain cost. And so here you see an edict that we found carved into the wall of a marketplace in Rome. You have to sell items for this amount of money. This is an attempt to force the people of the Roman Empire to value money at the value that Diocletian wants it to be valued at, and to assign some kind of value to this currency. This also doesn't work. What happens? People don't sell publicly. It's just like paying, well, no, it's not actually. I was going to say it's like paying cash for something now. It's actually the opposite of that. People don't sell in the marketplace. They just do barters by themselves, bartering for goods or using old money, and they don't sell in the marketplaces. They don't use Diocletian's price controls. They don't use the new money. What happens? Tax revenues for the empire, which are based on level of trade and economic exchange in the empire, go through the floor. So this economic effort is also a failure. So Diocletian is going to have to come up with a new way of reforming the economy of the empire. That's what I'm going to talk about in the next video.